In this break, we're so glad we got to hear from Catherine. Sorry about the QR codes. I'm human. I apologize. Didn't know. But we put up the QR codes here for the March Google folder. So if you want to just scan the QR code, we also the Google folder should be hyperlinked to your calendar invite and the email that Vicky sent out as well. But if anything, let me know. Email me and I'll send the link directly to you. And just please take the SWAVO survey. We really want to hear from you all. This space is for you, and for you. So please let us know any training topics or things you'd like us to add for next time. And then
we just added.
okay, and Catherine's PDF slides are added to the Google folder as well now too. So if we can just all come back together so we can give the time to Katie Fox. She is the Victims' Rights Coordinator at the Victim Services Commission.
I can't solve it all.
Sorry, friends.
There you go. You're good.
Okay, we're gonna start. We're gonna introduce Katie. Katie Fox, she's the Victim Services Victims' Rights Coordinator at the Victim Services Commission that was created by our legislators last year. So we're gonna have all things about it. So welcome, Katie Fox. Thank you for joining us. Don't share. Thank you. Sorry, I gotta get to the beginning of the match. So many buttons, sorry. You're good.
Okay, so
Sorry, there we go.
B said, I am Katie Fox. I'm the Victim Rights Coordinator with the Victim Services Commissions. We have lots of letters and I am within CCJJ. Thanks to our last presenter. I know that my shaking knees and my heart pounding are good for me and it's a good response. So, and I have the host as boss.
And then just a reminder, Al picks up like all conversations, so you have to have conversations about.
Okay.
Oh, is it
Use my fine motor skills to
Try it now.
okay, so this is the Victim Services Commission staff. Many of you may know these people. Marlise Jones, she was the sexual assault resource coordinator with UPC before coming to be our director. Rochelle Hill from UOBC. She wanted to make sure to say hi to everyone because she couldn't be here in person. And so I'm Katie Fox. So before coming to the VSC, I was at the Utah County Attorney's Office for about 15 years. So I feel like you are my people. I feel like this is a good place to come and talk about victims' rights. So on the Victim Services Commission, we have statutory people that are on the commission. We have UOVC, we have UCASA, UDVC, and we meet monthly to talk about victim issues that are happening in our state. So these are open public meetings. They are in person at the state capitol, but they're also on Zoom. And I would encourage any of you that have the time or the capacity to join, please do so. Your voices are important so that we know what's going on throughout the state and so that we can elevate victims' issues to the people that can, you know, help solve those issues.
Sorry, it's tricky. I'll pick up what that is because I moved your mouse.
Okay, so under the Victim Services Commission, we have several subcommittee groups that are meeting monthly as well. We have a DV subcommittee group, a sexual assault subcommittee group, a child abuse, and a multicultural subcommittee. And these groups are talking about issues that are impacting your communities. We just did a great multicultural group last week talking about language access. We're talking about legislation. We're talking about boots on the ground, things that are happening and what we can do to help victims throughout our state. So if you have any interest in any of those areas, please reach out. The meetings are mostly on Zoom and use your voices to help us know what's going on in your communities. The VSC has a lot of duties that the legislature, put in front of us. One of the main things that we are working on right now is we just started a research study. So the U of U is conducting it. They may be reaching out to your agencies to talk about what's happening in your agencies. So that we can get a comprehensive look at victim services throughout the state. And what gaps are we seeing? How can we better serve our rural communities? And make sure that they're getting the same services that, our urban communities are getting. So that's one of the things that we're focusing right now. We have a lot of other duties, as you can see, all those words. And the VSC did take over the duties of the Crime Victims Council. It went away last December. They did a lot of great work for many, many years. And we've taken on like the Crime Victims Conference is coming up, and victim rights is something that we took over from them. So that's why I'm here. So this is just kind of a breakdown of what we do up at the Victim Services Commission level. We advise, we support all of our subcommittees and the members, and we're trying to solve problems. We're trying to figure out what is happening and how we can help victims. And then how we can inform and advocate for your agency as well. Okay, so this is my job. I get to work with the victim rights committees throughout the state. There are amazing people that are volunteering their time to review the victim rights complaints that we are receiving. These committees have been functioning for many, many years. At my time in Utah County, I attended the 4th District Victim Rights Committee, and many of you may not know that they were existing, but now I have the privilege of being the first person to coordinate and help these committees review the complaints. So we do have a statute that we fall under, and each committee has a sheriff, they have a prosecutor, they have a chief of police, they have an advocate. Let's see, we have someone from APMP. Many communities have victim survivors that are part of their committee. So they're a multidisciplinary team that is looking at the complaints as they're coming in. So we do have an online form. It is currently housed under CCJJ's website, but also ULBC still has it housed on theirs. And this has made the complaint process accessible to more victims. We're seeing a lot more complaints come in now that it's online. There are still paper forms that, victims don't have access to go online, but we do have the form online. It is also now in Spanish. Last month we had our first complaint that was in Spanish, and it's just amazing to be able to get access to more victims to let us know what's happening. I don't speak Spanish, that's one of the downsides. But Google Translate helped us work through that process. But if we do get a Spanish-speaking victim file a complaint and they want to come to a committee, we'll make sure that they have interpreter or any other language. We've had a Portuguese-speaking victim come, and we made sure that she had an interpreter. So I want victims to feel like it's a safe space that they can come to us and that they can be heard no matter what language they speak. And one of the things that I'm really working on is making sure that all the complaints are handled the same way. That if someone complains in Box Elder, their complaint will be handled the same way as someone in St. George. Because before, it was kind of like the Wild West. Whoever was in the committee, they were just doing their best to handle the complaints, but we were getting really different outcomes. So now we want to make sure that victims are being treated the same throughout the state. These are our district chairs. So wherever you're at, you have a person that is chairing the committee. Andrea just left, but Andrea is here. She is in this district. And these people are volunteers and they are amazing. They spend their time reading these complaints, reaching out to these victims, and trying to find ways to help solve the problems that we are receiving. So if you know these people, reach out, or if you need their contact information, please let me know and I can make sure that we can connect with them. Before I came on board, not every district was operational. Now we have operating committees in each district, which is great. We're having a lot more meetings and we're reviewing a lot more complaints. Last year we had 25 meetings and we looked at 85 complaints. We're seeing more, like I get maybe 1 or 2 complaints a week, which is not great because we're talking about victims that are having issues, but it makes me feel good that victims have a place to come and talk about what's happening. We now have a process where victims can come and feel supported. I try to be very trauma informed and let them know what to expect and be there to support them if they come in person or they come online to talk to the committees, because it can be intimidating to have this group of strangers talk about the things that went wrong in your case. So I am there to be their support. And we've also had prosecutors, law enforcement, people come when they had a complaint against them and talk to the committee. And it's really empowering to victims to have the person that they're complaining about come and talk about, you know, what happened, but also they can hear, you know, maybe I'm sorry, or I didn't mean for that to happen that way, or just to get a different perspective. I think victims walk away feeling heard at the end. This is our statute that talks about what happens when someone complains. When that form is filled out, what's the next steps? And you're welcome to go that, but I'm gonna go over it in more depth. We also last year passed a rule to make sure that everything is happening the way it's supposed to be. And that if you join a committee, there's an outline of what your role is, what should be happening when you come to these meetings. I know it can be scary. If you get an email from me, I know your first thing be like, oh no, victim rights person is reaching out to me, what now? But it's not really a process to fear. It's not punitive. We're not going to yell at you. We're not going, you know, I've done this for a very long time. Advocates, you're out there doing the best that you can do. And sometimes, even if you do everything you can, a victim's going to walk away not feeling like they were supported or that they weren't heard. And so if you get an email and you're invited, it's really a conversation. How can we elevate victim services in our state? How can we make sure that a victim feels heard? Maybe it's as simple as the prosecutor stepping in. We had a complaint last week where a victim can give her victim impact statement and sentencing. She was there, she was ready, and the prosecutor just failed to let her give the statement. And the prosecutor came in and she said, yeah, the judge was talking. He just kept talking. I didn't feel like I could interrupt him because I didn't want to upset the judge, but then the victim gave her statement after the sentence was already pronounced. And the prosecutor is like, I could have done better. You know, I should have spoke up. I understand that now and, you know, acknowledge the mistake. And I think that made the victim feel better that, yeah, we're all human. We all make mistakes. We're not going to be perfect all the time. And just to have the victim hear the prosecutor say, I should have done better for you, was validating to that one victim. So this is kind of confusing, so I'll break it down, but if a complaint is filed, it comes directly to me in my email, and I then ensure that it goes to the right district, to the right chair, and make sure that all the committee members have an opportunity to review it. The first step is that we meet and we talk about it. And when we say, is this a violation or isn't it? Because unfortunately, a lot of times a victim will file a complaint and it's just not a victim rights violation. We'll talk about the victim rights statutes a little bit later. They're confusing. It's hard for victims to know, but we review the complaint. And if we think maybe there's a chance that it's a violation, we're going to reach out to that victim and we're going to invite them to come to a meeting, and we're going to invite the subjects to come and talk about the complaint with them. Sometimes the committee will want more information. Last committee meeting I went to, we got the sentencing audio from the court. Or sometimes victims send us emails or text messages between their prosecutor or their advocate or you know, with their law enforcement officer. And we'll review any relevant information. And if we find that there's a violation, then we'll send a letter to the subject, we'll send a letter to the victim, letting them know, and we'll offer resources. We'll offer training, we'll offer suggestions on how to better improve communication for their processes. And if we don't find that there's a violation, we're still going to try to help that victim. You know, I may reach out to the prosecutor and see if there's a way to facilitate better communication or offer training suggestions for an officer on, you know, how to be more trauma informed or something, you know. We still try to help the victim resolve the problem, even if it's not a violation. And throughout that whole process, I'm offering resources to victims. What do they need? Who can I turn, you know, where are you guys that I can say, have you talked to your victim advocate? Have you talked to your shelter? Have you talked to a counselor? And have you filed a claim with your for reparation? So I'm trying to help the victim, even if there is not a valid complaint. So this is a part that I think is really important, and this is where you guys can help. Every agency under this statute needs to have a policy in place addressing a complaint of victims' rights violations. That means law enforcement agencies should have a policy, prosecutors' offices should have a policy, so that if someone is violating a victim's rights, your agency has a policy that says, this is what's gonna happen. If you violate it the first time or the second time, but having that policy is going to help victims feel empowered that something can be done. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but a victim rights committee can't really make a prosecutor's office do anything. We can't make a law enforcement agency do anything, but if they have a policy that says you're gonna get written up if you do this, or you're gonna have to do an ethics course or something, like that's where it's going to help this process empower victims by having a policy that says this is what's going to happen to you if you violate insurance. This is more for prosecutors, but you know, if you violate a victim right, they could file a civil action. That's never happened, so don't be afraid of that. But it's just a disclaimer that we put in there. Okay, so what are our victim rights statutes? So under Utah Constitution, Article 1, Section 28, there are 3 things that every victim in the state of Utah are entitled to. The first one is to be treated with fairness and respect and dignity and free from harassment. What does that even mean? Do you guys have any idea of what that means or what that looks like? Yeah, this is one, we spend a lot of time in our committees talking about this one, because what does that mean? If a prosecutor, you know, doesn't listen to a victim and ultimately decides not to make the offer that they wanted, that's not a violation of this. It's not a violation of the victim's right. But maybe if the prosecutor in that conversation said, well, I think you're dumb, I don't know that the prosecutor would say that, but you know, like, but a lot of times victims, the way that they're talked to matters to them. And what they're hearing sometimes isn't actually what's being said. When you're in a trauma response, you know, you can't really process things. And sometimes they might go back and replay that over and over again, and they see it differently than what the prosecutor did. And that's all, we've had several complaints that are dealing with this. Like, this prosecutor said, well, that's not really sexual assault. But that's what the victim heard, but that's not what the prosecutor said, you know, that he said. But that's how she processed it. And so, you know, like, free from harassment, that one's easy, right? Like, you shouldn't be harassing, you shouldn't call names, you shouldn't belittle a victim, but Some of these other ones are a little bit more nuanced. A prosecutor may think, or a law enforcement officer may think that they're treating someone with respect, but they may not be perceiving it that way. And then the next one is to be, upon request, be informed, present, and heard in important hearings. Probably not surprising to all of you, but this doesn't happen a lot. This is, victims are not being told about hearings. They're not being informed about what's going on in their cases. And it starts from the beginning. The law enforcement officers they're not telling them where their case is going or what's happening next. Prosecutors are not the best at communicating what's going on. And then the third one is to submit and have information considered at sentencing. Okay, so the Victims' Bill of Rights, this is where most of my work comes in, and the victim rights committees. This is where we're going to see if a victim rights violation has occurred. So the legislature put this nice little intent language at the beginning of the Bill of Rights that says, in this chapter, the legislature declares its intent to ensure that all victims and witnesses of crime are treated with dignity, respect, courtesy, and sensitivity, and that the rights extended in this chapter to victims and witnesses of crime are honored, protected by law in a manner no less vigorous than the protections afforded to criminal defendants. Are you guys seeing this? Are you seeing the protections the same as are afforded to criminal defendants? No, we're not. We still have a long ways to go to get to this point, but that's why the Bill of Rights are there. That's why our committees are getting complaints, and that's why we're looking at it, because we're not to a place yet where victims' rights are being upheld the same way as defendants. So all criminal justice agencies have to ensure, that's an important word, right? If you know anything about the law, shall ensure the victims have a right to be informed of threats, assisted through the process, clear explanations of proceedings. Sometimes it's hard to know if we're doing that. Sometimes we don't know if victims are understanding the explanations that we're giving. I mean, talking to a 5-year-old about what's happening in their case is different than, you know, maybe an elder abuse victim. And sometimes officers are great, but they don't understand the nuances of talking to victims in a way that they're going to understand that. Have all their personal property returned, restitution, that's a hard one, right? Making sure that victims get restitution. We had a complaint last week where a victim feels like her restitution that she requested wasn't ordered. And in talking to the prosecutor, you know, it wasn't something that the prosecutor felt was tied to the case enough to make that request. And so she felt like her rights had been violated, and we had to review it and look at what happened. And ultimately, you know, she should have had a right to ask for it and then let the judge decide, even if the prosecutor didn't feel like they legally could ask for it. So just having that prosecutor there and hearing that, like next time, he may make sure that a victim has a right to ask for whatever they want in court and then let the judge decide. So, you know, we're just learning. Sometimes it's the learning moment in these committees to make sure that these victims get their rights upheld. So, speedy trial, that's a tough one. You know, we had a complaint where a victim felt like her right to a speedy trial was violated, and we have to look at it. And that wasn't something we could find because, you know, it had been almost a year. But in looking at the court docket and what had happened, there was reasonable delay. And that's hard for a victim to hear, that, you know, a year, that's so long to be sitting with something horrendous that happened to you and waiting for the end. But through our committee, she was able to come. She was able to hear someone from the court, a prosecutor, a law enforcement officer, and a victim advocate talk about this is the reason why these delays happen. And she may have heard that from her advocate, she may have heard that from her prosecutor, but to have another group of people who cared enough to listen to her and just say, we understand this is hard and this is why these delays happen. I got an email from her, she was just so thankful that we were able to talk to her and give her the explanation. Maybe that time she heard it, she was in a place to understand and comprehend that, yeah, the judge's calendar, unfortunately, it matters. The defendant's calendar, unfortunately, it matters. So it's not that your prosecutor didn't care that this had taken so long, but, you know, just having that validation and having a place to have her voice heard was really helpful to her. And then this is where victim rights. We need to change this. I'm just going to say that right now. There are several different statutes that talk about victims' rights. They're all over the code and they don't make sense. And I've been doing this for a year now, and sometimes I still have to go back and look and be like, oh, wait, does that work for this case? Because they're so confusing. I don't know how any victim would be able to figure this out, because I've been working in prosecution for, you know, almost 20 years, and I don't understand them. So we need to change that, and that's something that I'm hoping to work on, is to get them fixed so they make sense. How many of you work in justice courts? A lot of the victim rights do not apply to those cases, and that shouldn't be it. I understand that there's a lot of cases and there are a lot of victims coming through there, but they do not have a right to give input on a plea offer. They don't have a right to notice about hearing in their case. So there are lots of victims that just don't have a say in their cases right now. And that's something that I personally would like to change, but that's gonna take, you know, new legislation. So these only apply to felonies. And sorry, these ones do apply to felonies and misdemeanors. So, you know, they have a right to privacy, they have a right to restitution. The timely notice is only court hearings where they have to be present. What does that mean? What's timely notice? You know, if you ask a victim to come, last week I had a victim, she's in Alaska. She had a bench trial in a week. And, you know, to get a flight, to get a hotel, and then come testify against her stalker, that's asking a victim a lot of her. So is a week timely notice? Well, under the statute, it probably is, because she had notice. And, you know, these are the kind of things that, you know, I get really worked up about, because I care that a victim has a voice. And, you know, maybe someone has $5,000 for flight and travel to come to Utah to testify at a bench trial, but more than likely they don't. Victims of sexual assault have additional rights, as they should, and, you know, and these are really important in our sexual assault cases, to know if we found DNA, to know if it was, you know, in the Utah Combined DNA Index system. And they do have a right to designate a person, which is really important for our sexual assault victims, all of our victims, really, to have someone else that could be the point of contact if they're not in the place.
We got a question in the chat. Why only HIV?
Testing.
Yeah, that's just something that's in the statute. That's something that could be fixed as well. But right now, the state will only fund this, but UOBC, how
They can do testing for other sexually transmitted infections, the victim, but to have the offender being tested involved, like
Yeah, so,
They don't get a choice, that's like part of it, like they could ask the defenders tested.
Mhm.
And they would then have a warrant, so to get tested for others, the law enforcement would have an additional warrant.
And I think so last year, there was some legislation around, the Sexual Assault Victims Bill of Rights. That was, advocated for as best practices for the Office on Violence Against Women. And so, we had worked with OVW as well as Representative Romero to kind of, tweak some parts of the current statute. What was the current statute last year to, have those more in line with the Office on Violence Against Women. And so, by doing that, we were actually able to get a little bit more extra funding from the Office on Violence Against Women. And one of those was very specifically HIV testing. So doesn't mean that other one shouldn't be tested, but that one was pulled up specifically.
And our child victims, they have additional rights that are really important as well. You know, if you've ever been with a kid when they have to come to court, it's so scary for them. It's this big, scary room with people that are, you know, towering over them, and they have to go in and talk about a really, really hard experience. I had this little kid, he had to come in and testify. He was actually the victim's brother, but you know, I had a judge stand up on the bench and look down at him and tell him that he needed to tell the truth. And, you know, of course, he was really scared, and that testimony did not go very long because, you know, his right to be treated with dignity and respect and to have, you know, child-like explanations was definitely violated in that instance. Because of the way that the judge treated him, so, you know, it's really important that children know that they're not responsible for the inappropriate behavior of adults, and we don't ever want to make them feel like they're, responsible for what happened. You know, using appropriate language is really important. I had a 3-year-old, crazy enough, she was on the stand testifying, you know, we had to get an extra bench, she had her little blankie up there. And the defense attorney, he did not know childlike language, and he kept asking her questions, and she was just looking, and she's like, I'm 3, like, I don't know what you're saying. So, you know, that was his cue, like, okay, I need to use childlike language, so,
Sorry, it's one section, it's my, I just hold your mouse for a sec. Okay, there you go.
okay. Okay, so let's talk about some case scenarios and tell me what you think about these ones. So this one is a victim files a complaint with the victim rights coordinator with me saying the prosecutor dismissed their case. They're upset and they want the case refiled. What do you think the victim rights committee can do with this complaint?
I guess.
Someone said depends on the crime. Any other thoughts? No?
I think requesting that the prosecutor explain why, give with clear
Explanations?
explanations.
Yep, so the committee did review the complaint. And they found that the complaint didn't violate any statutory victim rights. The committees can't affect prosecutorial discretion. They can't tell a prosecutor what to do. They can't tell a law enforcement officer what to do. So we had to close the complaint and the victim was provided resources. But to your point, yeah, like that's where I would step in and I'd be like, do you know why your case was dismissed? Were you given a clear explanation of why they couldn't go forward with your case? And I could connect them with the prosecutor or the advocate to have that conversation with them, or I may be able to get that information for them and talk to them about it.
And they can refer to the Attorney General's office after the complaint, right? It's like a-
Only on first-degree sexual assault cases.
Oh, okay.
It's a first-degree felony.
How about
So
ED, only on sexual, only.
only on sexual offenses. Yep. So here's another one that we received. The victim filed a complaint alleging that 2 different prosecuting agencies failed to notify them of the transfer and ultimate dismissal of their case. Thinking about this one.
Yeah, timely notice.
And notice, depends on if it's a felony. So this was a case. There was a conflict of interest case, which means the prosecutor that had the case couldn't go forward prosecuting the case. The judge told them they had to get off the case. So they sent it to another prosecutor, and that new prosecutor thought that the victim knew what was happening. He thought that the victim advocate at the original prosecuting agency was still talking to the victim, still letting them know about what was going on with their case. And this was a little bit of a unique case where the victim was an attorney. So the new prosecutor also thought, well, she has access to exchange. She knows how to read the court docket. She must know what's going on because she has that ability to know for herself. So this one, we were able to find that there was a violation of the victim's rights. This was a great case because the prosecuting agency that conflicted the case out, they acknowledged it. They said, hey, we messed up. We should have told her that her case was leaving our office, where it was going, and giving her contact information for the new prosecutor. And then also, we could have done better about communicating that once the case leaves our office, the victim advocate isn't going to be able to keep working on their case. And so the new victim advocate should have picked it up in the other agency. And so they wrote this long letter to the victim explaining that. It was so great. And the victim, was able to hear, I'm sorry. They could not refile her case, which was something that she wanted. So that's something that a victim rights committee can't do. But because of this case, we were able to take it out to SWAP, which is the Statewide Prosecutors Association, and they made a best practices policy for conflict cases so that all prosecutors in the state now know that if you're sending a case out of your office, you should tell the victim. Like that seems like common sense, but now it's best practices. They let the victim know if you're sending the case out, and then hey, new prosecutor, you should call that victim and let them know what's happening in their case.
I have a question, you kind of touched on it, so you can't retry, you can't refile, right? Like you
Right.
can't request that they refile.
Right.
What does the victim get besides, is it just like the explanation of why it happened or that it was their fault? Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
is that what they get, I guess?
Yeah, that's the most that we could do is just say, this is what happened, get that, in this case, the prosecutor apologized and said, we should have let you know. But in some cases, maybe it's because the victim wasn't able to participate at the time, right? Maybe it's a domestic violence case where the victim wasn't able to participate and the case was dismissed, but later she was. And that's a case where the prosecutor could potentially, but we can't tell them they have to do anything, but maybe we could say, hey, this victim is now in a better place where she would be able to participate if you would take a look. Or if there's more evidence that the victim says, they can always get that back to their law enforcement agency and have that added to the case. So just having more support, it may be, but we just can't tell them what to do.
Yeah.
And so like, if someone does violate it, what are the repercussions like? For either the officer, or the prosecutor, or something like that? Is it just like their agency's policy?
Yeah, so as a committee and as a victim rights coordinator, I can't issue sanctions. I can't, I could say, I don't like what it is, but there's nothing punitive about these committees. But that's where the policies in the agency are going to be really important. So that if a major violation happened, then there's some repercussion to that officer or to that prosecutor.
And it's required for each agency
Mhm.
to have it?
Yeah, yes. Under statute, and a lot of them don't know this, it was put into statute last May, that they're supposed to have a policy, so I am going to different groups like this, and training in hopes that everybody will get that policy in place, but if you don't have a policy, bring it up or tell them to call me. I'll talk to them about that.
And the state bar
And the courts, the administrative office of the courts has different complaint processes. That could be a complaint against the attorney or a complaint against a judge or commissioner that are separate from what the Victims' Rights Committee can do. But those can be another like avenue that was egregious that that is affecting their license as an attorney or the judges or commissioners. So like one that we had before Katie was here is that it wasn't, we didn't actually have like a set one victim that filed the complaint, but like we had an issue in Utah County, and so several of the advocates emailed Amy Hernandez, the case numbers of where a victim was being mistreated during hearings, and they were able to have some corrective action with that commissioner in the court system.
And, you know, law enforcement have their internal, their IA processes. I refer victims to those processes.
Yeah.
For law enforcement officers as well. Right now, there's a bill about a prosecutor conduct committee that's similar to the Victim Rights Committee. If that passes, that's another avenue for prosecutors as well as the state bar.
I just want to add, Kristen Guthrie added, my agency conflicted a case, and as the advocate, I informed the victim, sent them the victim advocate information, and she contacted the new victim advocate and with the victim information and provided that warm handoff. Just wanted to call out the good stuff.
Yeah, good stuff. Is there any other questions? So this is our statistics. 89% of the complaints we received were not sustained. But what this is telling me is our criminal justice system has problems. There are a lot of victims who have issues that we're not able to address through the victim rights process, but there's a lot of things that are going on. Third district, which is, you know, a big district, of course, they're gonna receive the most complaints. While first district received the least complaints. What do you think the most frequent complaint you receive is?
Not amateurs.
Yeah, probably. Mine.
Was it notified of a hearing?
Yep, it's communication, right? Whether it's not being told what the offer is, not being told when the hearing is, not knowing who their prosecutor is, not knowing who to call if they have a question. A lot of it is just communication. I know you guys do the best you can. You have a lot of cases. And you're running from case to case, victim from victim. So I understand that things fall through the cracks and that, you know, sometimes a victim may not be told until a day before a hearing. And it's not because there was any malice or ill intent. It's just you're so busy that sometimes it doesn't happen. But, you know, I had a victim in January reach out because she was driving from California to Utah to testify at a sexual assault trial. When she got a call that her trial had been rescheduled 2 months earlier. So she had a subpoena, she was coming to Utah, and no one had told her in that time frame that, you know, that the trial had been canceled. That caused a lot of trauma for her, and she was very, you know, she had all of this angst, you know, coming to Utah and what she had to do when she was Utah just to be told, okay, you should turn around and go back because it's not happening. You know? So these things happen. And, you know, I understand that they happen, but I just want to let you know that I'm here to help you. So, you know, sometimes a victim may just not hear what you're saying. Sometimes you may have given everything you have to give to that victim and they still are not happy. And I want you to know that they can call me. You know, I spend a lot of time talking crazy enough to defendants who just don't have the support that they need, and I feel like they're being harassed in the system, and of course I can't help them and I refer them, but you know, this criminal justice process is scary and it's hard. It's overwhelming for even people like me that have been in it for years. And so I want to be able to support you guys when you're getting these victims who may have a valid complaint, but they may just need some extra support and another person saying, I understand that you're unhappy with what's happening. And I will listen to you, but you know, these are some things that we can do and these are the things that we can't do. You know, I spent like 3 hours on the phone with this lady who felt like she was being stalked by her neighbor. Police hadn't filed any charges, there wasn't any case, so there wasn't a criminal justice component to what she was talking about. But I talked to her and I said, these are the things that you can do. Have you thought about a stalking convention? Is that something that's possible? Is that something that you're capable of doing? If not, okay, here's some things, you know, just for you, how to help you while you're going through this. Because I want to make sure that I'm being trauma informed and recognizing and meeting victims where they're at, but also, I also want to just be a support to you. I've only been in this position since last June, and so this is a new thing. I know it's scary when people hear a complaint and things like that, but I want to be helpful in this criminal justice system. Another resource for you as advocates and for the victims in our state. Do you have any questions?
I do have, you kind of touched a little bit too on it, but it's, if charges have not been filed. This is, and let's say somebody has a complaint about a police officer, that's not something that the committee is gonna review. You might refer them to different processes, is that correct?
So we can, so if they have an investigation or law enforcement contact, so that's part of the criminal justice system. So law enforcement, you know, of course prosecutors, but also board of pardons, probation, those are the things that we can look at, but you know, like housing. If they have a problem with the housing code, that's not something that we look at. And, you know, DCFS, we've had several complaints about DCFS, and that's not something that we can look at, but I do refer them to the ombudsman. And, you know, or talk to their caseworker and see how we can resolve it. So, just to let them know that there are other places where they can go if they can't utilize our committees for their complaints.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
Just when I was at the Utah Crime Victims Legal Clinic, just want to echo like communication and remembering the reptilian brain, that trauma brain. A lot of my conversations, I would find that they have been told. By the end of our conversation, they have been told. So just know that like sometimes when these calls or complaints are happening, it's really just they're having their experience and it's not like, you know, sometimes if they're calling us or you're like, hey, let's give Katie a call, right? Or if you're having some things, give Katie a call, give the Utah Crime Victims Legal a call. A lot of times I found that in those phone calls, they just wanted an avenue. They just wanted to be heard. And y'all are busy, so refer if you need to, right? And we're here to have those phone calls and conversations. Sorry, Edith and Lonnie, I know you're all here and I'm telling people to call the Utah Crime Victims Legal Clinic. But just know that we're all here to support each other when it comes to these conversations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so if you see my name come across your email, please don't panic. And if you do, you know, it's a good thing to have that stress response, helping us grow in mind, so. Thank
Well,
you.
and that was something that with our needs assessment really supports the victims, that was their biggest thing that they felt like wasn't a need met was communication, and so having that communication and doing it as soon as you're like informed, like the example where you gave that she didn't know, but this hearing had been set 2 months earlier, so if they had notified her right after it would have been reset and changed and scheduled, that would have caused less change.
Yeah, you know, I had a victim call me, she hadn't filed a formal complaint, but, you know, an advocate referred her to me. And I talked to her and she didn't know that she had a right to say she didn't agree with the plea deal. Like, she has that right, and I explained it to her, we looked through her case, I said, I understand that you're not happy, the prosecutor probably has reasons why they're making this offer. But you have a right to tell the judge that you're not okay with that. And the prosecutor will let you do that, and you can do that in writing, you can go in person. And she called me back, she's like, yeah, I went to the hearing, I told the judge why I didn't like this offer. And he took it under advisement, and I told her, you know, the judge may still side with the prosecutor. And that's okay, but at least you had an opportunity to be heard and let the judge know how you feel or felt before he made that decision. So just empowering victims to know their rights. is something that I am happy to do at any time with victims, because I have the capacity, if, you know, that you guys may not have sometimes for your victims, but please reach out. That's all.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we will take a lunch break and come back at 1 o'clock.
All right, I do have a cheat sheet, Ryan.